Why are Joe Mixon, Dameon Pierce, Dak Prescott, and Kirk Cousins some of the safest picks on the fantasy football board in 2023? It's time to break it down right here, right now, as we begin another edition of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm one of your co-hosts, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL and fantasy football for sportingnews.com.
Hey, I'm Michelle Magdziuk, and I'm researcher for NFL Network and fantasy analyst for NFL.com.
All right, Michelle, we have a good show today. Have a very safe show. This is going to be a very safe space today as we break down the safest picks you can make on the board. We have each a couple running backs, a couple wide receivers, and a quarterback and a tight end we've selected. That these are the guys that are the high floor players that you're targeting in drafts, that you know what you're going to get. There's little volatility. It's a more medium reward with very low risk. So that's what we're looking for at least. And hopefully there's higher reward than that. But these are the guys that we feel the best about, that you can't really go wrong slotting them in at their current ranking or ADP. So we'll get into those guys here in a moment. First, I have to tell you, this episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. You'll find them at Gametime, gametime.co, or the Gametime app. Thanks again for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. We're your destination to become the smartest fantasy football player in the league, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Michelle, I will send it to you first here, and we'll look at your two running backs that you've listed as the safest picks that you can take on the board here. Have at it and tell us why.
Yeah, so I think a big part of both of our strategies have been, over this last month, we've been talking about upside, and upside is so important, right? But at times you can't pick upside with every pick. So I just wanted to state that before we jump into it, because, let's say your first running back that you draft in your fantasy drafts, maybe it's Tony Pollard, maybe it's Travis Etienne, maybe it's Ramondre Stevenson or Jahmyr Gibbs, guys with high upside, but are a bit risky. So maybe then when you get into the middle of your drafts and you're looking for your RB2, you take a guy that you know is going to be a safe RB2 at the least, right? So I have two of these guys here. It's James Conner and Joe Mixon. So I'll start with James Conner first, because I think people are scared off of him because of his offense. But when you're drafting James Conner, you're getting a guy that you know is going to lead his team in scrimmage yards, right? And in touchdowns, most likely. And no, it might not be the prettiest, but we saw last year, I mean, it was a brutal first start of the year for him, but in the second half of the season, he really came alive. From weeks 10 through 17, he averaged 102.1 scrimmage yards per game, scored 7 touchdowns throughout those 7 games. He ranked 4th among running backs in scrimmage yards per game during that span, behind only Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, and Christian McCaffrey. And Kyler Murray missed 6 of those 7 games that we're talking about here for Conner. So I don't think it's the end all be all with Kyler Murray being out and James Conner is going to stink. Like, I think he is a super safe guy. He's not very exciting, but he's going to be an RB2 for you. And you may be a little bit worried about his injury history, but I think that's totally built into his cost. So when you're looking here at James Conner, where you have to take him, I mean, you're taking him around Rachaad White and Cam Akers and Javonte Williams and Dalvin Cook, like all guys that have a ton of risk, that have to split backfields, that you don't really know what's going on with them. You know James Conner is going to get the workload. So I think he's extremely safe and a great option this year. And then that's kind of the same thing with Joe Mixon. He's not going as late as James Conner. You kind of have to take him there in the round of Etienne and Stevenson and Gibbs. But while those guys might have, you might say, a higher ceiling, although Mixon has a pretty high ceiling himself, you have no idea what their workload is going to be this year. And with Joe Mixon, it's Joe Mixon. That's it. Like, that's all that's in the backfield right now for the Bengals, especially now that Samaje Perine is gone. And you're talking about a guy that is leading a backfield. He's going to get nearly 300 touches, and he's on one of the best offenses in the NFL. He's going to have so many scoring opportunities that it's kind of crazy how how late he's going and how safe of a player he is in his range. He was a running back 8 in fantasy points per game last year, running back 7 in points per game in 2021. And now you can get him around running back or around the spot 33. So you don't have to take him until the 3rd round. I think he's a super, super safe pick, although, yeah, it might not be exciting since he's been in the league for so long.
Yeah, and that's the thing, Michelle. It's not necessarily about exciting. It's about guys that are going to bounce your first pick. Now, you really like Bijan Robinson. Now,
Yes.
at certain points in the draft, if you could get James Conner, that's more likely to be available at some point with your follow-up pick, then you're going to take him. You have a guy that has the upside, so now you have a reliable guy that's going to get the touches. So that's a good balance for your team. And Joe Mixon, if you choose to go wide receiver or tight end early, he's not a bad first back to enter the draft with. So I like your choices here because, again, volume is sometimes king over some things we think. And I think they're in great situations, right? Not a lot of competition. Joe Mixon has some young guys behind him. James Conner, this backup situation still sorting itself out. So really, it sets them up for the key touches in their backfield. Now, I have a couple of different guys here with their roles, but I'll go with Aaron Jones. He is very consistent to me. And I actually like the fact that they have A.J. Dillon in Green Bay because it makes sure that Jones isn't overworked. I think they use him really well. We also know that he has that 20 touchdown upside. We saw that before. I mean, he got just on the brink of it here with Aaron Rodgers that first year that he was starting. So this could be very similar here for Matt LaFleur. It's the first year of Jordan Love starting, so they could rely a lot on the backs. Jones is always doing enough in the passing game, and even though he gets a few touchdowns lost to Dillon and the passing game, he's still going to get it done. Overall, we've buzzed a lot about the Packers. We like A.J. Dillon as a sleeper. Luke Musgrave is climbing up boards. We've talked about Romeo Doubs and Jaden Reed coming behind and having some value behind Christian Watson. I talked up Love yesterday. So this Packers offense is trending in the right direction. Jones is the centerpiece of it. They need to get him the ball. So I feel good about Jones. He's finished consistently in the top 7-9 range there last 3 years in half point and full point PPR. So he is very reliable. And I'm going with Dameon Pierce. It would seem a little bit silly to do this because, again, he is a second-year back in a new offense, and he kind of lets down at the second half of last year, got hurt. But I'm looking at the situation here. Devin Singletary doesn't do a lot in the passing game. We know that from his days in Buffalo. Pierce can stay on the field. Really comes down to just his pass protection where they can keep him out there with C.J. Stroud. But I think they'll rely a lot on Pierce. Just dump offs, the zone blocking scheme. This offensive line is pretty good with Laremy Tunsil, so they have a way to run the ball. And we saw it last year with Pierce. So, and with all these guys, Michelle, I think the common thread is that we've seen them do it before, and we have that comfort level with them. And that's why I feel really good about Pierce in year 2 and Jones just keep doing it here after all these years.
Yeah, you have to feel really good about feeling confident about Pierce's workload this year. There's no way they're going to, make CJ Stroud throw this ball even 500 times. I can't even imagine that this year as a rookie. Not a lot of great weapons in the passing game. They're going to lean on the run game, and it's clear that they want Dameon Pierce to be the focal point of their offense. So I agree with you. I think his workload makes him super safe, and he's a really talented player. And I think he's been working on his receiving chops as well. So I really like that pick by you. I will say I wanted to bring up on this podcast because he's going right around Alexander Mattison. So, I'm always thinking about his name. I had a dream last night. I think you're getting in my head. I had a dream last night that we were in week 1 of the NFL season and Alexander Mattison had like 3 carries for like 9 yards or something by the end of the game. And Ty Chandler was the leading back. I think you've gotten in my head because it was a nightmare.
It could be. Yeah.
No.
So I don't know. Is Aaron Jones is this all to say that Aaron Jones is the anti-Alexander Mattison?
Maybe. I do think Aaron Jones is one of those guys. He's kind of like a Tyler Lockett, who I will be bringing up in next segment, where he's a veteran and he always gets it done, but people just kind of overlook him. But before we get into our wide receivers that we think are the safest to draft this year, I got to talk about the Gametime app. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and the best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have. So my sister was actually in town a few weeks ago. We were just walking downtown and we decided we want to go to a Houston Astros game. And from past experience, I knew I could hop on the Gametime app, find cheap tickets purchase with ease, and receive the tickets to my phone instantly. I've truly never had a bad experience with Gametime. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. Get images of your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Buy tickets in a matter of seconds, 2 taps, and you're set. Tickets are sent directly to your phone so you never have to dig through your email. Snag the tickets without the stress with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use Locked On NFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem code Locked On NFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Vinny, I really liked your choices here for your safest 2 wide receivers. And I think we haven't been talking about one of them enough. So I want you to start with this guy. And it's Amari Cooper of the Browns. He's a hard one to trust, right? But I've been wanting to get hotter on him. So talk me into Amari Cooper being safe this year.
Well, I think you see him everywhere he goes, whether it's the Raiders or Cowboys. He kind of settles into an offense pretty well, and partly because he can run good routes and he's comfortable with any style of offense that they want to use him in. And also, he just is one of those veteran players right now that is adaptable and adjustable to his different quarterbacks. And I think Deshaun Watson, you go back to his history there with DeAndre Hopkins, he was a guy that he appreciated because he could run the right routes and get open. And Amari Cooper had a solid year last year with Jacoby Brissett and Watson throwing to him. He's just very solid. Again, he's not going to blow you away sometimes. He sometimes can go without touchdowns for weeks. So there were a little bit of annoying splits with him. I think home and away with Donovan Peoples-Jones last year. So that was also hard to look at. But overall, you look at his numbers and then you put him in to a lot of games, you're going to get those big numbers that you're looking for at the end that are going to give you wide receiver 2 at least here. Now, I would say Cooper does come with some volatility. He can have those games. We've seen them before where he has one catch for 7 yards because he gets shut down by a corner. But I think Watson's going to help him get open here. I think Jacoby Brissett was only thrown to Cooper, and we see some of these quarterbacks do that when they're only open. And sometimes you got to get your best guys the ball when they're not completely open. And I think Deshaun Watson's going to do that. He'll have confidence. So I like Amari Cooper quite a bit here. And I think, again, he's not the juiciest pick there that you can get, but I would say I would consider him maybe over Keenan Allen, just because I know Amari Cooper is a little bit more durable at that position.
Yeah, I will say with Amari Cooper, let's say he starts off hot, right? Would you then consider trading him before you get towards the end of the year? Because Cleveland weather does scare the crap out of me. And Deshaun Watson playing in Cleveland weather last year was not pretty, but they have 3 games in December, which is all during fantasy playoffs in Cleveland against the Jaguars, Bears, and Jets, all in the month of December. Does that worry you at all? Would you then consider trading him before that happened?
Yeah, we'll see what his numbers are like. I think he has to blow up a little bit. So let's see what he does in the first game against the Bengals.
That Cleveland wind is no joke.
Yeah, I mean, I
players.
would think about really, this is why I like Nick Chubb a lot, because he's going to get the ball in the second half of the season. I'm not saying I want to invest too much in the Browns offense in general behind Chubb at this stage with the passing game, but if you're just looking for a receiver in the middle and you just want a guy, and again, maybe you went for Garrett Wilson or Chris Olave and you're feeling good about that first pick, and then you can go wait a little bit and get Amari Cooper, get some running back help or tight end or quarterback, and then come back and get Amari Cooper. So I think from that sense, I think he's going to give you what you get when you draft him, and that's what we're looking for with a lot of these players.
Yeah, that's completely fair. And with your other guy here, he's been in the news the last couple of days because his teammate is sticking up for him. So we're talking about DeVonta Smith here, but AJ Brown, his teammate, just came out, I think it was yesterday, and said, stop hating on one of us. Like, you don't have to pick sides. We're both absolutely great talents at the wide receiver position. We're both wide receiver ones. Enjoy it while you can. And I feel like that's what you're saying here with DeVonta Smith. He's a wide receiver 1 talent, just, next to AJ Brown.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why we have such a disparate ranking for some of these guys, and AJ Brown and DeVonta Smith should be pretty close to each other, and he's a guy that you may forget about. I mean, it's hard to forget about a guy who won the Heisman Trophy, went in the first round, was a wide receiver 1 in a lot of ways last year if you look at the scoring. So I don't know. He's just a guy maybe because of this stuff that you hear from the Philadelphia media, which they can control pretty much everything. They even controlled some narrative on the Browns, which is funny to me that they went to joint practice and then everyone was down on the Browns because of all these observations. So I'm kind of laughing at that. And I don't know. There's just a lot of different opinions with Philadelphia beat reporters. And yeah, they probably want to create some separation to say Brown is better than Smith or Smith is better than Brown. But he's right. They can both produce at a high level. We've seen this in many situations before. We've seen it with, of course, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. So I look at DeVonta Smith, and he's just going to get it done. He's just so smooth here, and he has that chemistry with Jalen Hurts, plays off Brown perfectly. That's why they do the swole Batman, skinny Batman thing. Yep. I think they're ideal complements to each other. So if there's a name that I would look at the back half, I don't know if I would go with him until I get to like 15 or 16 on the board, but anytime after that, I would have to give him serious consideration, depending what running backs and other positions are available.
Yeah, I like these two picks by you. With DeVonta Smith, he's just one of those guys that would be going so much higher. Like, I feel like he'd be getting the hype of a Garrett Wilson or a Chris Olave, if it wasn't for AJ Brown being there. But he truly is just so talented, and people are overlooking that just because of, the splashy plays that AJ Brown makes. So I agree with you. He's a pretty safe pick. Now, he is going rather high, wide receiver 13. But when you're looking at the guys around him, T. Higgins, DK Metcalf, Calvin Ridley, I think Smith is easily the safest of that bunch. And mine are mine go with draft cost as well. So it's Tyler Lockett of the Seahawks. Come on, guys. Every year we do this, right? Fantasy finishes over the last 5 seasons. Wide receiver 13, wide receiver 16, wide receiver 8, wide receiver 13, wide receiver 16. And now this year he is going all the way down at wide receiver 28. Maybe because they drafted Jackson Smith-Njigba in the first round, but now he's dealing with an injury. You don't even know when he's going to be back, and that could derail his rookie season there to start. But Tyler Lockett already has the connection in this offense. Pete Carroll loves him. Geno Smith connected with him great last year, and you're drafting him. There are other guys around him maybe that have higher upside, because I don't think Tyler Lockett has the upside to finish as a wide receiver 10 this year, but he should finish as a top 20 wide receiver. But when you're looking around him, it's Jerry Jeudy, Drake London, Brandon Ayuk, Mike Evans. Sure, maybe those guys have a higher upside, but they're also so much riskier. So if you take, Garrett Wilson or Chris Olave in the first round or second round, and that's kind of your wide receiver 1 there, take that safer guy in the second instead of trying to hit a home run twice. You don't have to always go for home run picks. Tyler Lockett's going to consistently just win you weeks. And then Diontae Johnson is my second guy. He's definitely not an exciting pick. I 100% get that, right? But he had 0 touchdowns last year, and he was still the wide receiver 28 in fantasy points. And now he's going as a wide receiver 32. You would think that has to be his absolute floor, right? Wide receiver 28. If you can hit that while scoring 0 touchdowns, and it's because of his target volume, 144 targets, 169, 147. Those are his targets over the last 3 years. Only 4 guys have been targeted more than Johnson over the last 3 seasons. That was Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, Justin Jefferson, and Tyreek Hill. Yes, those 4 do a lot more with their targets than Diontae Johnson does. But now we're getting pumped about Kenny Pickett, right? We're seeing that he may actually be a franchise quarterback, or he could take that big leap. So if we think that, then Diontae Johnson should also be a very good performer, even if George Pickens steals some of those targets. And also, he's going to get touchdowns. It's not a thing that he's ever struggled with in his career. The 2 years prior, it was 7 and 8 touchdowns. He led the team in red zone targets last year, led the team in end zone targets. He's going to get touchdowns. He's going to get the targets, and he's extremely safe, especially if you play in full PPR. I think by far, maybe the safest pick in the entire draft if you play PPR. This guy was the wide receiver 8 in 2021. So it's not even like you're saying he doesn't have upside. He does. He was just wide receiver 8, 1 year removed. And he's going around Michael Pittman and George Pickens, who, if you want to go for the upside, fine. Mike Evans. There's guys with upside possibly, but Diontae Johnson also has upside. And in full PPR or even half PPR, he's just so safe this year.
Yeah, especially where he's going. People just forgot about him. He should not be going where Michael Pittman is going. That's just
no.
I mean, he could be a lot like Amari Cooper and Keenan Allen, those type of receivers, and I think he could elevate there easily. And Tyler Lockett, yeah, now you feel a lot safer about him that Jackson Smith and Najigba is maybe out of the picture for a little while. I think that makes you feel better. But again, I was a little bit more worried about DK Metcalf in the first place, just because he's a little bit more volatile, big play and touchdown dependent, where Tyler Lockett is just a technician. And you're right. The quarterbacks have loved him. The offensive coaches have loved him. Pete Carroll loves him. So that's all good. And same thing with Diontae Johnson. He's just a very important cog to what they do in Pittsburgh. So I love all our picks here. Really, I think we did a good job here. These are safer ones. Smith and Cooper, obviously a little bit more higher investment. Johnson and Lockett, you can look at later in drafts. Now, we each also have picked a quarterback and tight end. We'll get into those in our final segment. Again, thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first day. Every day or tomorrow on the show, we're going to do the flip side of this. We're going to look at the riskiest players there in terms of the high risk and we're not sure about the reward type of players. So we'll explore that on tomorrow's show. So a good compliment to this. Locked On Fantasy Football is your destination to become the smartest fantasy football player in the league. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Michelle, it is time to close the show here. And again, going safe with our picks, our safest picks on the board so far. At running back, you've picked James Conner and Joe Mixon. At wide receiver, you picked Diontae Johnson, Tyler Lockett. I went with Aaron Jones and Dameon Pierce in the backfield, and Smith and Cooper, Cooper and DeVonta Smith. They're two Alabama guys. And now we're going to our picks at quarterback and tight end. Let's see where you're going here. And you have a double Dallas connection with your picks. I'll just give that away.
You do love that name duo there. So my quarterback is going to be Dak Prescott. I know I've talked a lot about him, but I really just want to hit home here before everybody drafts, right? So he had a fractured thumb last year, week 1. Missed 5 games. It was not a pretty fantasy season whatsoever, right? But he was still the quarterback 13 in fantasy points per game in a season that everyone thought was just so horrendous that he has to be drafted so low this year and everyone's just over him, right? It was still the quarterback 13. He scored more points per game than Justin Herbert, who were all, hyping up this year, including me. The same amount of points as Trevor Lawrence, who you love this year. But Trevor Lawrence is going nearly 30 picks ahead of Dak Prescott. And yeah, you might say, well, Trevor Lawrence has the upside because he's young and he can take another leap in his 3rd year. Sure. But like Dak also has great upside because we've already seen it. I mean, yeah, last year it wasn't great because he had a freaking fractured thumb he was coming back from. But in 2021, he was a quarterback 9 in fantasy points per game, quarterback 1 in 2020. He did only play 5 games, but quarterback 1 in points per game, and then quarterback 3 in 2019 in fantasy points per game. We've seen the upside with him, and now fantasy managers are just so scared off because of his performance last year, and maybe with what's his name, the OC. Keelan Moore,
Brian Schottenheimer and Mike McCarthy. I think
with Kellen Moore gone and with Mike McCarthy calling plays,
it's just scaring everyone.
It's scaring people off, but they're going to have to pass. They have all the weapons. They do not have the running back personnel to run it that much. He's just such a steal where he's going as a quarterback 10. And then right after him is Tua, Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, Daniel Jones. Are you telling me that he doesn't have way more upside, plus is way safer than any of those guys? And even Deshaun Watson's going one spot ahead of him. Like Dak has the same upside as Watson. We've already seen it in fantasy. Yeah. And he's just way safer in an offense that he's a team that he's been with now for how many years, with Watson with a new team and coming off an even more disastrous year than Prescott.
Yeah, that's a really good pick here, Michelle. I think he just gets forgotten about. Again, there's a lot of Cowboys negativity, I think, in general. Everyone thinks they're going to be this run-heavy team because that's what Schottenheimer and McCarthy have planned. But then you look at Brandon Cooks, you look at Jalen Tolbert showing up there and that looking good. You have still Michael Gallup and your guy Jake Ferguson, your sleeper tight end. So there are some weapons there that maybe are not getting enough for respect here. And I think they're going to have a little bit higher passing volume. And I think the Tony Pollard shift here is also going to help because he's a receiving threat here, and they didn't really have a lot. So I don't think they're going to be a ground and pound team by any means. So that's going to be helpful for Dak Prescott. Now, I'll quickly get into my quarterback pick, then you can reveal your tight end. Mine is Kirk Cousins. I've already banged the table for him for a career year, and I think it's just going to be volume, volume, volume. I mean, a little bit why I'm a little bit off Alexander Madison. I think this team is going to be passing a ton with Kevin O'Connell. And now that you have Jordan Addison in there, a little bit of a younger receiver to replace Adam Thielen, KJ Osborne, TJ Hawkinson. We know Cousins likes to throw to the tight end as well. And, of course, Justin Jefferson going on a lot of boards as a top player. So when you look at that, there's just a lot of weapons. He's very consistent, as we've mentioned before with the numbers. He's right around 30 TDs every year, delivers the high volume. He doesn't even run, and he's always finishing in the top 10. Pocket passer who does that, so you really can't go against that. So that's why I'm going Kirk Cousins. Again, he's not juicy. He's not going to necessarily have 4 and 5 touchdown games, but he's going to have a lot of 2 and 3, and that's what we're looking for.
Yeah, we've been bringing up Kirk Cousins as a safe guy this year. I think he's much safer. I feel like he always gets put in the same bucket as Jared Goff, which I do not think is fair to him at all. I think he's so much safer, and he's been doing it much longer, where he's going to produce for you in fantasy, and at least you can actually play him in some away games. Like Jared Goff, you cannot. So I would never call Jared Goff safe. So I think that's unfair for him that he's put in that same bucket. Moving on to my tight end that you said, another Dallas guy, but it's just because his name's Dallas Goedert.
It's not Jake Ferguson.
It's not Jake Ferguson. It's Dallas Goedert for the Eagles. Listen, he is, besides Travis Kelce, he was the safest tight end to have last season on a week-to-week basis. Goddard missed 5 games with a shoulder injury, and he still put up 10 games with at least 9 fantasy points. That was second among tight ends, behind only Kelce. Again, he missed a chunk of time with that injury. So, like, from week to week to week, he was getting it done, right? He wasn't putting up consistently huge numbers like Kelce was, but he was never killing you in your tight end spot. And I think that's okay, right? If you don't hit on the Kelce, or you don't go go high on Mark Andrews, who has high upside, I think it's okay just to get a guy that consistently scores 9 to 15 points for you in your tight end spot, instead of risking getting 0 to 1-2 points in there. And I think he's super safe, and where you're taking him, I think it's a fine spot, right? It's tight end 6, 69th overall. He's going after George Kittle, after Darren Waller by like a round and a half, a round and a half. And those guys are much, much riskier. Right after him are Kyle Pitts, Evan Ingram. I mean, that's like, you don't even know what you can literally get 0 points from them in any given week. So Dallas Goedert, like, it doesn't feel great to use a 6th round pick on him because he's not shiny or fun, but I think he's a really just solid pick that's not going to hurt your team, and it's just, you don't have to worry about the tight end spot then. You just plug him in every week and he's going to be just fine.
Yeah, I mean, I personally don't go after him too much. I did have him on the team last year, and he did well, so I can't argue with that. But I do like him quite a bit for that consistency. And again, when we say boring, sometimes that means safe, and they're just going to come through. And sometimes we just don't think about the floor, as we've tried to hammer home that point a lot. Think about the floor a little bit more when you have some ceiling players. And I think it's fair to mix up your portfolio with your draft, is have some of those high upside players, but balance them out with some veterans that are going to get the job done. Now, Michelle, it's my turn to talk about a Steeler here, and it's Pat Freiermuth. And look, I don't love him that much, but I know he's going to be involved in the offense. Kenny Pickett is playing well, and that's making us feel great about Diontae Johnson and George Pickens. And we'll see what the third receiver plays out, right? I mean, we've seen different guys in the mix here, but I just know there's a trust between these two guys, and he can make some big plays as well. And it's not very frequent, but he's a reliable guy. Again, he's not going to put up big numbers in any given week, but he's always a good threat to score a touchdown because they're going to be more involved in the red zone. I just don't see Kenny Pickett being so low volume with his scoring passes this year. So there's going to be opportunities to score. And he's a guy that moves the chains, who's a little bit more consistent. George Pickens would be the big play guy a little bit more, but if they're looking for someone in the middle to complement Diontae Johnson and have that offense playing off Najee Harris and the running game, I think Patty F is pretty good here. So I just like what he can do. Again, he's probably a 9 to 10 point guy at the most, but look, I'll take it. I don't want to necessarily go too deep. And if I'm drafting him, I'll say this: go get an upside tight end after him. Maybe a Sam Laporta, a Luke Musgrave, if they're available. There, or Michael Mayer, one guy we've looked at late, or Hunter Henry. Don't just sit on him. But I think you could feel good about starting him out of the gate here and say you'll get enough points. So look, he's just like Dallas Goedert to me, like not the most exciting, but I feel okay if I ended up with him at my tight end starter, assuming I'm loaded at the other positions.
Yeah. So with Pat Freiermuth, I could almost put him as he's right there on the line of that high, like almost being in tomorrow's episode, the high risk, low reward, because his cost isn't as low as I would like. I mean,
Yeah,
he's going 91st overall. He's going right around Jahan Dotson, right around Jordan Addison, Brandon Cooks, before Khalil Herbert, before Gabe Davis, like all guys that I can think can actually be a difference making for your team. And Pat Freiermuth is just not a guy I even think is going to matter for fantasy very much at all. Like you said, like maybe he has some 8 to 10 point games, but I also think he could have lower than that in any given week as well. So I think this is the one player on the whole episode we might disagree on.
yeah,
But yeah, I'm just like totally off Pat Freiermuth. I don't know why. I understand he's a really good tight end. He just, if you're ever at a Steelers game, when he catches the ball, you go Heath for Heath Miller, because that's what we
yeah,
used to yell every time Heath Miller caught one, and he looks like Heath Miller out there. So it's just like a little fun joke.
yeah,
But he's exactly Heath Miller. And Heath Miller was a great
yeah.
NFL tight end, not good fantasy tight end ever.
Yeah, I think it just depends. I think what happened with Heath Miller was year to year, right? Depending on when they had that reliable third receiver. I don't know if they have that right now. I mean, there's some options for that third receiver, and they can consider that. But yeah, I think maybe what we're saying based on the way we're feeling about this is that no tight end is really safe in this tier. And you might want to go up and go get the upside guy, or make sure you're locking in as much as possible to Kelsey or Hawkinson or Andrews and
To be
Waller.
fair, I did steal like the one safe option, right? I feel like Dallas Goedert was the clear option here, and I got into the doc before you
Because I
or
wanted to think
podcast
about
doc, and
David
I put down Dallas
Njoku, but
Goedert.
yeah, I don't feel great about David Njoku or Evan Ingram and all these guys. So, I mean, I could say Travis Kelce is safe and we could go down the line, but you don't need to hear that. You don't need to hear Andrews and Hawkinson is safe. So we're going with an option that might be a little less volatile. I look, and let's talk about some of those guys around. I mean, Evan Ingram, the targets, where are they going to come from? I mean, I think what I like about Patty F and Dallas Goedert is they're the clear cut, probably third options in the passing game. I think you could say, okay, they work in Najee Harris a little bit there and some of these other receivers. Eagles tend to work in some other receivers as well. But you say, if they're going down the line, we're going to look at this guy, we're going to look at this guy. It's very parallel, right? I mean, you have two guys they're wide receiver. They're very talented. Middle of the field is going to open up. So think about it that way. So again, just think Pennsylvania. I think you'll be safe if you go after these guys at tight end. And look, it's not going to be spectacular, and it may not be spectacular anywhere once you get past a few tight ends. But you just want somebody who can maybe perform like a wide receiver 3. That's what you're looking at. You have to at some point say this tight end is going to be more like my wide receiver 3. I'm going to upgrade wide receiver 3 into someone who's more of a wide receiver 2. And then you say, okay, this guy's okay and passable at that position. And that's how you kind of have to look at it sometimes if you're passing on tight ends early.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying there. And I think this whole episode should help a bit with just make sure you're not swinging for the fences in every pick. If you swing for the fences in some earlier picks, draft some of these safer guys later in your draft. And then tomorrow, make sure not to miss the show when we get into the riskier guys that you could be taking in your drafts. So maybe stay away from them.
Yeah, we'll look at those players tomorrow for sure. So thanks again, Everydayers, for checking us out. Every weekday, we bring you a show and making us your first listen. So check that out. Locked On Fantasy Football is your destination to become the smartest fantasy football player in the league. For Locked On Fantasy Football, this has been Vinnie Iyer.
And I'm Michelle Magdziuk. Bye, y'all.